You wake up, you grab your phone, and you expect the usual morning updates, but instead you get hit with a bombshell that completely reshapes the landscape of the NFL. And frankly, if you are not sitting down for this, you probably should be, because the Buffalo Bills have just made a decision that is either going to save their franchise or send it spiraling into a decade of irrelevance. We have to talk about Sean McDermott getting fired after 9 seasons, a move that feels like a glitch in the Matrix considering he made the playoffs in 8 of those years, and yet here we are, staring at the end of an era in Western New York. But before you react, hold on, because the firing itself isn't even the craziest part of this story. It is what happened immediately after that has everyone in the league scratching their heads and asking what is really going on behind closed doors at one Bills drive. You see, usually when a team fails to reach the promised land for nearly a decade, you clean house, you sweep the floors, and you start fresh. But the Bills did something unprecedented by keeping general manager Brandon Beane, and not just keeping him, but essentially handing him the keys to the entire kingdom. This is where the dopamine hit comes in. Think about the logic here for a second. The roster had holes, the drafting has been questionable outside of Josh Allen, and the depth was non-existent in the playoffs. Yet the guy responsible for building that roster is now more powerful than ever. It makes you wonder if accountability is just a buzzword in Buffalo, or if there's a secret master plan that we are all too blind to see. And just when you think you have wrapped your head around that, the curiosity gap widens because now we have to ask who on earth is going to take this job. Coaching Josh Allen is the dream. It is the golden ticket. But if you have a GM who has survived a 9-year head coach and now has total control, are you walking into a trap? It feels like a setup where the next coach is just a scapegoat waiting to happen, and that tension is palpable. Now, let's pivot for a second because the coaching carousel isn't just spinning in Buffalo, it is going off the rails in Miami and Tennessee too. And if you thought the Bills news was wild, wait until you hear what the Dolphins are doing. Miami has officially hired Jeff Hafley as their new head coach on a 5-year deal. And if that name sounds familiar, it is because he was just running the defense for the Green Bay Packers. This is a massive shift, a complete philosophical pivot for a team that has been trying to find its identity for years. And get this, Miami also hired John Eric Sullivan from Green Bay as their new GM. So essentially, the Dolphins looked at the Packers and said, "We want that." Copy-pasted the front office and coaching staff and are praying it works. It's a bold strategy, almost reckless, but sometimes you have to burn the boats to take the island. But here's the catch, and this is the little nugget of insight you need to hold on to. Hafley is a defensive mind, and Miami has been an offensive fireworks show. So are we seeing the end of the greatest show on surf in favor of a gritty defensive culture? That is the question that is going to haunt Dolphins fans all offseason. Meanwhile, in Tennessee, the Titans looked at the landscape, saw the chaos, and decided to bring in Robert Saleh, the man who turned the Jets' defense into a juggernaut and was running the 49ers' defense like a well-oiled machine. Saleh over Matt Nagy is a statement. It is the Titans screaming to the world that they want to punch you in the mouth and play physical football. And honestly, after watching the soft coverage we've seen across the league lately, this feels like a breath of fresh air. But let's circle back to Buffalo, because there's a name floating around that refuses to go away, a ghost of the AFC East's past that is haunting the rumor mill, Bill Belichick. Could you imagine the hoodie in Buffalo? It sounds like fan fiction, like something you would dream up in a fever state, but insiders are whispering that ownership has always been intrigued by him. However, and here's the reality check, does Belichick really want to walk into a situation where Brandon Beane holds all the cards? It feels like oil in water, a massive ego clash waiting to explode. But the very fact that we are discussing it shows just how desperate this franchise is to finally get over the hump. Now, speaking of getting over the hump, we have to address the elephant in the room, or rather the Seahawk in the room. Because while everyone is panicking about coaches, the Seattle Seahawks just quietly looked like the best team on the planet this past weekend. They didn't just win, they dominated. They looked like the only team that actually understands that defense still wins championships. And watching them fly around the field gave me flashbacks to the Legion of Boom era. It was electric. It was terrifying for the rest of the league. And it made you realize that while we're all obsessed with quarterbacks, sometimes a terrifying defense is the ultimate cheat code. But sadly, we can't talk about quarterbacks without talking about the heartbreak in Buffalo. And listen, I love Josh Allen. The guy is a warrior, a gladiator in pads. But we have to be honest with ourselves. That playoff performance was a disaster. It wasn't just bad, it was catastrophic. The turnovers, the fumbles, the forced throws, it was like watching a superhero lose his powers at the exact moment the world needed saving. And the criticism he's getting, it's brutal. But is it unfair? When you're paid the GDP of a small country to throw a football, the expectations are stratospheric. And when you deliver one of the worst games of your career in an elimination game, the arrows are going to come flying. But here's the nuance that people miss. Was it all Josh, or was he trying to play hero ball because he knew his roster wasn't good enough? That's the tragedy of the modern quarterback. You are either the savior or the villain, with no middle ground. And while we're on the topic of struggling quarterbacks, we need to have a very uncomfortable conversation about CJ Stroud. Look, the kid had an amazing rookie year. We all bought the jersey, we all hopped on the bandwagon, but that recent playoff game, 4 interceptions in the first half, that's not a slump, that's a meltdown. It was painful to watch, seeing his body language crumble, seeing the confusion in his eyes. It reminded us that progress isn't always a straight line. The Texans are now in this weird limbo where they have to decide if they commit hundreds of millions of dollars to a guy who's been inconsistent for 2 years now. It's the ultimate gamble, and frankly, I don't envy the person who has to sign that check. It's easy to say he's young, he'll learn, but the NFL stands for not for long, and patience is a luxury that teams simply don't have anymore. The consensus is they'll pick up his option, sure, but a massive extension? That check might stay blank for a little while longer until he proves he can handle the bright lights without melting down. Now, let's zoom out for a second because all of these stories, the firings, the hirings, the meltdowns, they all point to one singular truth about the NFL right now. Ownership is terrified of mediocrity. The Bills winning 11 games wasn't enough. The Dolphins making the playoffs wasn't enough. The bar has been raised so high that even consistent success gets you fired if it doesn't come with a ring. It's a ruthless, cutthroat business, and we love it. We are addicted to the drama because it mirrors life in the most extreme way possible. High stakes, massive consequences, and zero room for error. And speaking of zero room for error, let's go back to that Brandon Beane situation in Buffalo, because I cannot stress enough how bizarre it is. Think about the dynamics of a workplace. Usually, the manager and the employee succeed or fail together, but here, the manager threw the employee under the bus and then got a promotion. It sets a dangerous precedent. If the next coach comes in and struggles, is Beane going to fire him too? At what point does the finger point back at the man constructing the roster? It's a curiosity gap that is going to keep us engaged all season long, because the first time the Bills lose a game next year, the cameras aren't going to cut to the coach. They're going to cut to the GM's box. That's the storyline to watch. And don't sleep on the Joe Brady angle either. The offensive coordinator who has a great relationship with Allen is sitting right there. But league rules say you can't just hand him the job without a search. It's bureaucratic red tape clashing with urgent necessity. And it's going to be fascinating to see if Buffalo follows the rules just to end up doing what they wanted to do all along. It's like waiting in line for a ride you already have a fast pass for. Frustrating and inefficient. Meanwhile, let's give some credit to the officiating crew this weekend because for once, we're not talking about a blown call ruining the season. There was that one interception ruling that had people yelling at their TVs, but when you slow it down, when you look at the replay, they got it right. And isn't that a relief? To actually talk about the football and not the people in stripes? It's a small victory, a tiny hit of satisfaction in a sea of chaos. But back to the Titans for a moment. Robert Saleh is a fascinating character study. He got a raw deal in New York, let's be real. The media market there eats people alive, and he never really had a quarterback. Now he goes to Tennessee, a place that values grit, toughness, and running the ball. It feels like a perfect marriage, a homecoming for his style of coaching. If he can bring that 49ers defensive intensity to Nashville, the AFC South is going to be a war zone next year. And that brings us to the broader point about defensive coaches. For years, the league has been obsessed with the next Sean McVay, the young offensive genius who can score 30 points in his sleep. But look at who's getting hired now. Hafley, Saleh, guys who stop points rather than score them. Are we seeing a market correction? Is the league realizing that you can't just outscore everyone, that eventually you have to tackle someone? It's a pendulum swing that happens every decade or so, and we are right in the middle of it. And then there's the Seahawks. I cannot stop thinking about how dominant they looked. In a copycat league, teams are going to watch that tape and say, we need to do that. They were physical, they were fast, and they were nasty. It was a reminder that intimidation is a skill. You could see the fear in their opponent's eyes. That is the kind of dopamine hit we crave as fans, pure, unadulterated dominance. But let's bring it back to the most human element of this whole news cycle, the pressure. Can you imagine being Josh Allen right now? The weight of an entire city, a city that has never won at all, resting on your shoulders, and you just dropped the ball, literally and figuratively. The psychological toll that takes is immense. We look at these guys as avatars in a video game, but they're human beings dealing with failure on a global stage. That is why the comeback story is always so compelling. If Josh Allen